The machines had been humming a cruel lullaby for weeks, keeping 3-year-old Dawson Zamora suspended in a medical fight no child should ever have to wage. This was not a quick battle lost to sudden illness. It was a devastating, prolonged struggle against catastrophic injuries allegedly inflicted by a trusted adult. For the entirety of this agonizing vigil, Dawson's father, Dawson Zamora, was his constant sentinel in the hospital room. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. Dawson had become the sole source of public updates, communicating the grim reality of his son's condition to the world via social media. He documented the terrible, slow decline of the boy who had been reduced to a patient reliant on technology for every breath. The core of Dawson's suffering was the brain damage he sustained during the alleged assault, an injury so severe that doctors held out little hope for recovery. Dawson's posts were raw, documenting the exhaustion and the terror of watching his young son fight for a life that was slipping away. Then, the final, heartbreaking update came on the night of December 7th. Dawson took to Facebook to share the news that shattered the hopes of everyone following the case. His statement was deeply personal and delivered with a profound sorrow, emphasizing his need to speak directly to the public before speculation could take hold. He confirmed that his son, Dawson, had passed away. The time of death was recorded as 10:42 a.m. on that morning. This date was significant, as it was also Dawson Zamora's birthday. In a passage that resonated with an unbearable grief, Dawson described his son's final breath as his gift, connecting his own birth with his child's death in a devastating, permanent link. He wrote that they were now forever interlocked, and spoke of his belief that Dawson had consciously held on just to spend that last day, his father's birthday, with him. Dawson's final Facebook photo, him holding his son for the last time, served as the devastating punctuation mark on the child's 3 years of life. The father's posts during the weeks of the vigil also shed light on the immediate medical crisis. Dawson had previously shared the chilling detail that when medical professionals initially reached Dawson, the boy had already been pronounced dead. He emphasized that no one knew the precise duration of time Dawson had been deceased because he was allegedly driven to the hospital by his abuser, avoiding the crucial step of calling the police. Though doctors were able to resuscitate him, the ensuing brain damage was the ultimate cost of that delay, the irreversible injury that eventually claimed his life. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. The tragedy of Dawson's death immediately escalated the legal situation for the 2 individuals charged in connection with his abuse. Even prior to the boy's passing, law enforcement in Collin County, Texas, had moved quickly to make arrests based on the severity of the initial injuries sustained in October. The man accused of perpetrating the physical violence was Christopher Alexander, the boyfriend of Dawson's mother. He was quickly taken into custody in the days following the hospitalization. Alexander's initial legal troubles focused on his alleged direct action in causing the devastating injuries. Concurrently, Dawson's mother, Chelsea Berg, was also arrested. Her initial charge was based not on a physical attack, but on a severe failure to act, injury to a child by omission. This charge reflected the state's determination that she had violated her legal and moral duty as a parent by failing to protect her son from a known danger. Following their arrests in October, both were held on significant bonds. Alexander, the accused physical abuser, was detained with a bond set at $210,000. He remained incarcerated in the county jail in McKinney, Texas, throughout the weeks of Dawson's hospital stay. Chelsea Berg, however, was treated differently by the judicial system at the time. Her initial bond was set at $100,000, and records confirm she was able to post bond and was released from custody on the same day as her arrest. The legal framework was initially focused on injury and negligence, but the confirmed death of Dawson on December 7th obliterated the existing legal architecture. The tragic end to the 3-year-old's life meant that the state of Texas was now prepared to pursue the most serious charge in its legal arsenal against both Alexander and Berg. This move shifted the entire case from a story of child abuse with catastrophic injury to one of intentional or grossly negligent homicide. The consequences of this shift would be the difference between a prison sentence and a battle for their lives against the death penalty. The initial charges, filed while Dawson was still clinging to life, were merely the prelude. The subsequent forensic evidence, gathered when Alexander brought the boy to the hospital, detailed a hidden reality of escalating violence. What were the specific, devastating non-accidental injuries, found from head to torso, that medical staff instantly recognized? And how did they directly contradict the single, inadequate lie told by the man responsible? For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. The date October 14th marks the day when the full, horrifying extent of Dawson Zamora's abuse came to light. The process began under highly suspicious circumstances, controlled entirely by Christopher Alexander, the mother's boyfriend. Alexander was the person who transported the injured 3-year-old to the hospital, bypassing a crucial 911 call which would have mobilized police and paramedics immediately. Upon arrival at the medical facility, Alexander provided law enforcement and staff with his single, vague account of the incident. He claimed that Dawson's critical condition was the result of a simple fall. According to his statement, he was in an adjacent room when he heard a noise, a loud thud, and subsequently found the child injured. This brief, insufficient explanation was immediately viewed with skepticism, given the severity of the injuries the boy presented with. The timeline of the morning provided by Dawson's mother, Chelsea Berg, also created concern for investigators. Berg reported that she had left Dawson in Alexander's care at their residence sometime around 7 a.m. or 7:20 a.m. A short time later, Alexander sent her a seemingly normal, even mundane, text message referencing Dawson eating lunch. This attempt to establish a timeline of normalcy was quickly shattered when Alexander called Berg to inform her that he was rushing the child to the hospital. When Berg later met them there, Alexander repeated the minimal thud story but offered no further elaboration. Perhaps the most telling action of Alexander upon arrival at the hospital was his immediate shift in priorities. Court documents confirm that shortly after providing his weak explanation for the injuries, Alexander retained an attorney and ceased all communication with the police regarding the events of that day. This action spoke volumes. His concern shifted from the life of the child to his own legal peril, a clear indication to investigators that he had something significant to hide. The medical staff treating Dawson quickly provided the irrefutable evidence that demolished Alexander's fall story. Their forensic examination of the 3-year-old's body revealed injuries that were severe, extensive, and definitively non-accidental. The sheer volume and nature of the trauma suggested sustained and purposeful violence. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. The primary injury that would lead to Dawson's death was documented as bleeding in his brain and severe brain damage. This level of head trauma is inconsistent with a child's accidental fall. Beyond the cranial injuries, doctors documented evidence of abuse spanning a period of time, not just the single event of October 14th. This included bruising in various states of healing found over the child's entire body. The mixture of fresh and old bruises provided concrete, medical proof of a pattern of repeated, escalating physical violence that had been ongoing for an undetermined duration. The examination also found powerful evidence of direct, focused blows to the child's torso. Doctors documented wounds to his chest and stomach. This indicated forceful, intentional trauma beyond what could be explained by a fall or accidental bump. Additionally, the medical findings were compounded by the discovery of anal trauma. This specific injury was profoundly disturbing, further confirming that Alexander's explanation of a simple fall was a complete fabrication. When confronted with this overwhelming medical evidence, Chelsea Berg claimed to investigators that her son did not have these injuries when she left him in Alexander's care that morning. This statement, however, was directly contradicted by the doctor's findings of bruises in various states of healing. This forensic reality proved that many of the injuries had been sustained before the morning of the 14th, making Berg's denial impossible to accept. 2 days after the critical incident, on October 16th, Christopher Alexander was arrested. His charges included injury to a child, stalking and tampering and fabricating evidence. The evidence fabrication charge was directly linked to his dishonest statements and attempts to obstruct the investigation at the hospital. His swift detention and high bond signaled that authorities believed him to be the sole perpetrator of the violent act that brought Dawson to the brink of death. Despite Alexander's incarceration, the focus of the investigation turned next to the mother's complicity. a role that was about to be proven with her own words. Chelsea Berg's defense hinged on her claim of being tragically unaware of the severity of her son's danger. However, investigators soon recovered a cache of text messages from her own phone, her private digital confrontations with Christopher Alexander, that explicitly confirmed her months-long, conscious knowledge of his violence. What precisely did these text messages reveal about her failure to act, and what was Alexander's existing criminal history that made her omission even more reckless? For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. In the period immediately following Dawson Zamora's hospitalization, Chelsea Berg was briefly released from custody after her initial arrest on a charge of injury to a child by omission. Her public facade suggested she was a mother caught unaware by the alleged actions of her boyfriend, Christopher Alexander. This perception of victimhood was critical to her initial ability to post bond and regain temporary freedom. However, the foundation of her defense, that she was ignorant of the danger, was systematically dismantled by the recovery of her own text messages. Investigators obtained the digital communications between Berg and Alexander, and the contents provided irrefutable proof of her sustained, explicit awareness of the abuse long before the catastrophic events of October 14th. The texts eliminated any claim that she was a mother tragically blindsided by a sudden, isolated event. The text messages were shocking in their clarity and directness, detailing confrontations over multiple instances of injury to her son. The earliest significant text cited by law enforcement was dated September 9th, approximately 5 weeks before Dawson was rushed to the hospital. In this message, Berg expressed both alarm and accusation, pointing out specific, visible signs of physical trauma on her son's face and head. Berg wrote, detailing the injuries she observed, "He clearly hit his head when he fell. He has a bruise on his eyebrow and his whole jawline. Cheek is bruised." She then launched into an indictment of Alexander's behavior, stating, "You're reckless. He had progressively been getting more and more hurt with you. Leave me alone. I'm not blind. You are dangerous." This text proved Berg was aware of Alexander's capacity for violence, the pattern of her son getting progressively more injured, and her own definitive assessment that Alexander posed a dangerous threat. An even more devastating communication followed on September 18th, a full month prior to the final, fatal incident. Berg reiterated her concern, writing with unmistakable certainty, "Once again, 100,000% serious. You bruise him, hurt him, and cause damage. Every single time you are alone with him, there hasn't been a single time you've been alone with him where he hasn't been hurt." For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. These messages were the crucial evidence supporting the charge of injury to a child by omission. They demonstrated that Berg's failure to act was not negligence, but a knowing, conscious decision to continually expose her 3-year-old son to an environment she herself had explicitly labeled as dangerous and abusive. Despite knowing that her son was hurt every single time he was alone with Alexander, she continued to leave him in the man's sole custody. The investigation further revealed that Christopher Alexander was not a man with a clean slate. His criminal history was documented, including prior convictions for theft and unlawful restraint. Additionally, when he was arrested in October, he was actively facing an unresolved stalking charge related to a separate case. Dawson's father, Dawson Zamora, publicly confirmed that Berg was allegedly aware of Alexander's compromised legal status. He stated that Berg knew Alexander was using an ankle monitor and was facing accusations in the active stalking case. This knowledge of Alexander's prior violent and criminal behavior only amplified the recklessness of Berg's decision to allow him unsupervised access to Dawson, whom she knew he was repeatedly abusing. The text messages and Alexander's existing criminal record formed the unassailable foundation of the prosecution's case against Berg. The defense's initial claim of ignorance was completely destroyed by her own words. The state's position was now solidified: Berg's omission, her failure to remove her child from a documented threat, was a fatal betrayal of her parental duty. With the passage of time and the tragic confirmation of Dawson's death, the legal authorities had all the required elements to pivot to the most severe charge. The existence of the text messages made Berg's initial $100,000 bond and subsequent release a temporary reprieve. When the official ruling of homicide was established, the charge against her would be upgraded, reflecting the state's view that her knowing failure to act made her responsible for the child's murder. After weeks of fighting for his life, Dawson's death removed any ambiguity from the case. Both Chelsea Berg and Christopher Alexander were immediately charged with capital murder. What is the specific statutory definition of capital murder in Texas that applies here? And how does the threat of the death penalty dictate the final, high-stakes legal strategies of severance, plea negotiations, and the ultimate courtroom showdown? For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. The official passing of Dawson Zamora was the final, tragic trigger for the justice system to invoke its maximum power. The days following December 7th saw swift action by the Collin County District Attorney's Office, resulting in the rearrest of Chelsea Berg and the upgrade of charges against both her and Christopher Alexander. Berg's new mugshot was released, accompanying the terrifying legal entry in the court records. She was now charged with a single count of capital murder. Alexander's charges were similarly upgraded to capital murder of a person under the age of 10. In the state of Texas, the charge of capital murder is reserved for the most extreme homicides, requiring aggravating circumstances that exceed the standard definition of murder. The specific circumstance that applies in this case is the age of the victim. Under Texas law, the killing of a child 10 years of age or younger qualifies the crime as capital murder. This statutory requirement was met by the death of 3-year-old Dawson. The consequence of this charge is absolute: eligibility for the death penalty or a mandatory life sentence without the possibility of parole. The legal strategies for both the prosecution and the defense were immediately redefined by the specter of capital punishment. For the defense lawyers representing Alexander and Berg, the singular, most critical goal became saving their clients' lives. As legal experts noted, the primary purpose of a lawyer in a death penalty case is to keep their client alive, making even a sentence of life without parole a technical win for the defense. The death penalty provides the prosecution with a massive amount of leverage in plea negotiations. They can approach either Berg or Alexander and offer to take the death penalty off the table in exchange for a guilty plea to a lesser murder charge and, potentially, cooperation against the other defendant. Given the certainty of a life sentence for capital murder, this bargaining chip can be incredibly powerful in compelling a plea. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. A major procedural question facing the court is whether Berg and Alexander will be tried together or separately. Prosecutors would vehemently push for a joint trial, as they could use the highly prejudicial and damaging evidence against both defendants concurrently, creating a scenario where the jury is exposed to the full, devastating scope of the abuse. However, legal experts strongly anticipated that the defense attorneys would file a motion for severance to split the trials. The basis for this motion is the fact that the two defendants have inconsistent, mutually exclusive defenses. Berg's defense is highly likely to paint Alexander as the sole abuser, potentially arguing she was also a victim of domestic control, while Alexander's defense would argue that Berg was the negligent party who failed to protect her child. These finger-pointing defenses cannot be heard by the same jury without prejudicing both parties, making severance highly likely. Alexander's defense faces the most difficult case. His documented criminal history, including convictions for theft and unlawful restraint, while mostly inadmissible during the guilt phase of the trial, harms his character and could be used in the sentencing phase. The overwhelming medical evidence of repeated, non-accidental trauma, coupled with Berg's explicit text messages proving his pattern of abuse, leaves him with very few viable options other than shifting blame entirely to Berg, which is inherently risky. Berg's defense, despite the damning text messages, has more room to maneuver. They could use her own messages, where she calls Alexander dangerous, to argue that she was also a victim operating under duress in a toxic domestic relationship. This defense is designed not to get her acquitted entirely, but to persuade a jury to convict her of a lesser crime, such as the initial charges of neglect or child abuse, thereby saving her from the capital murder conviction. Ultimately, the legal process will be shaped by the severity of the capital murder charge. In Texas, where the death penalty is actively sought, the defense will be focused on survival, while the prosecution will be focused on ensuring that the horrific details of Dawson Zamora's fatal betrayal by the two adults entrusted with his safety lead to the maximum penalty. And as always, you've been watching True Crime Story Vault. where every story is told with facts, empathy, and respect for those who can no longer speak for themselves. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button and comment your thoughts below. Until next time, remember, the truth is never buried.